Welcome into the Irish NFL show as we edge ever closer to the new NFL season. Rookie camp or training camp for the rookies is this week. Next week it'll be all the players attending the proper training camp. We are getting ever closer to the big start of the NFL season, the big event. But we have a big event coming up. Actually, before I get introduced to guys, we have a big event coming up next month, as we announced last Friday. There we are. We will be in Buskers on the Ball, the new partner of the Irish NFL show, throughout the 2023 season for a live show with special guest Phoebe Schechter, who is from Sky Sports NFL. Everybody should know her at this stage. And we're looking forward to seeing many people there. There's been a good return on tickets so far. Everybody's very excited about the event. So delighted to announce that event there last week. I'm looking forward to it. Colin, I'll start with you. You've obviously done a number of these shows now with myself. They're always really good and very engaging to have NFL fans there.
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. It's always a good event. It's a great opportunity to kind of chat to people. And the fact that we have Phoebe coming along makes this one even more special. We obviously did the one earlier in the year, and that was really good. And to kind of, you never know what might happen. You never know what question might come from the audience. And that's what makes it kind of a lot of fun.
Connor, the last time out, I suggested Justin Fields should be traded. That didn't go down very well with the crowd. I had my theories. Thought maybe Bryce Young was the future of the Bears. This will be your debut for the Irish NFL show.
Oh, well, I can't wait. Irish NFL show, IRL, as the kids say, in real life. I haven't done an outside broadcast, would you believe now? And I'm going to drop a name here since we did the Ploughing Championships with RTE, my last Ploughing Championships in RTE. And no, I didn't have a free Renault to get there before anyone asks. Very different type of fields in question on that occasion. But yeah, I'm looking forward to you lobbing a few grenades, Brian, and we'll see what gets lobbed back.
It's be a good time to announce that Noel Kelly and Ryan Tubridy are not joining the Irish NFL show next week as special guests. They're too busy with the Oireachtas. Look, we're going to get into this episode. This is a bit of a quirky episode. As I said, we're just about approaching training camps. The rookies report first, then obviously the seasoned veterans. And we're going to call this one the redemption show, the regression of certain teams, which coaches are going to be on the hot seat come the end of this season. So we'll kick off with offensive players and who we believe will I suppose, have a redemption story. Not necessarily whether it'll become reality by the end of the season. And I'm going to start with one of the ones that was the most talked about players last offseason. I'm going to kick off with you, Connor. Deshaun Watson. I think Kevin Stefanski's on the hot seat going into the season. We discussed on other shows whether Deshaun Watson's play will kind of impact on ultimate decision whether he's maintained as the head coach this year. Do you see Deshaun Watson in a division which was we went back and forth on our AFC North review in terms of who are the leaders for this. Are the Steelers up for it? Like we spoke about the Browns and the tough schedules. They start with the Bengals. But Deshaun Watson really has to kind of get back to the form we saw of old when he was with the Texans.
He absolutely does. And as Andrew Morgan said, like Kevin Stefanski's job is inextricably linked to how he performs. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You know, when you guys were talking, I was nodding away listening to that one saying, yeah, like I couldn't agree more with that. As we're kicking off with Deshaun, let's just define what we mean by redemption arc in the context of Deshaun Watson here. We're talking purely football play on the field redemption. I don't see a redemption arc in terms of the ethics or morality of Deshaun Watson's behavior. Let's park that for one moment. You know, we've all talked about it plenty and justifiably so. We're purely talking about what he may or may not do on the field. I don't think, short of a massive change in behavior and how he thinks and how he acts and how he speaks about what he's done in the past and what he's alleged to have done, there's no redemption off the field that I can see in the short to medium term. On field, we all know what he's capable of, and you know that's why the Browns showed their asses, quote unquote, to get him, and why they gave him this much talked about fully guaranteed contract, which, you know, based on the play over admittedly 6 games and after 700 game days out of action, was way, way, way below what we had expected. And I think it's not just that, you know, he wasn't great. People had factored in or already priced in the fact that he hadn't really been playing in the best part of 2 years, and nobody expected him to shoot the lights out, but he was even further below where people thought he was, and that was the real concern. It's kind of shaken people's assumptions about. I mean, given the body of work he put together in Houston and winning those 2 division titles, looking, you know, really good for a rookie in the playoffs over his first 2 seasons there. You know, the sky seemed to be the limit for this guy, and he's put together enough of a body of work over enough games that, in purely footballing terms, again, I stress, you would have to expect that we're going to see something approaching the player that people believed in this season, and that they'll have some fun in that division. But it's not easy. It's not an easy path through there, and we've talked before on previous shows about the immense pressure that's on him, because it's not like winning 7 or 8 games and picking themselves up off the floor is enough. Like it's Super Bowl contention or bust. Like you just have to get there. You just have to have it, and it has to happen really, really quickly. And that's an awful lot of pressure, a pressure that he hasn't faced before. He was able to surprise to the upside in Houston. That's not what's expected in Cleveland now. And he's dealing with, as we've talked about before, a really tooled up Bengals offense for whom that window still remains wide open, in my view. Steelers, a lot of things bubbling under the surface there. They're feeling good about themselves. Some people think the roster is undermanned, but you got the Mike Tomlin magic to contend with. And the Ravens back up to something approaching full strength with Lamar back in harness. They don't have an easy path, and he needs to show a lot and needs to show an awful lot very, very quickly.
Colin, you're wearing a T-shirt that you'd probably get away with at the Dog Pound, so I'm delighted that we did kick off with the Browns. But just piggybacking on the points that Conor has made, what would take a season for all the critics and all the storylines off the field to go away? Because in fairness, we have seen NFL players who've had difficult times off the field, maybe not to the nature of the extent of what Deshaun Watson's been involved in, but players where you quickly forget after a couple of years the bad stuff that's gone on. What would it take to have a redemption story? Is it playoffs, or is it that the Browns are back kind of challenging at least to be making the playoffs?
No, for it to be a real redemption story, it's going to need a Super Bowl appearance. Deshaun Watson got the most guaranteed money. He got the biggest contract in terms of fully guaranteed. So that's the thing that we're working off here. So Connor rightly says this isn't 7 or 8 wins, but this isn't even making the playoffs. This needs to be serious business. And we talked about this previously, Brian, but I'll go back to it again. When Tom Brady, when Peyton Manning rocked into their respective new teams, they're teams that hadn't had to give up any capital to go and get them, and that made a big difference. I think Watson is, one of the most intriguing, because he stepped away from the game, or for 1 year, right, and then he was forced to step away, essentially. For 11 games, and it was, I think, 700 days. And so we saw some flashes, but most of last year was just bad. And especially when this was a guy who, when he came back from his ACL injury and he came straight back in, he looked fantastic. That would be my big concern for the Browns, is like he had the rust to shake off, but he didn't look good. And your receiving core is okay, and you've made some moves to improve it, but you're not looking at it going, wow, this is absolutely fantastic. And they're also, a team, I suppose, that the O-line was a real strong point a few years ago. I don't know if that can be said anymore. So I do think this is intriguing. And when I look at it, you're kind of going off the basis of, yes, he was great in Houston, but does that mean he's going to be great? The Browns hope so, and they better, it better pay off because of what they've given up in the contract. But I don't know what evidence there is to suggest that it will definitely happen. So to me, I think there are big question marks around Deshaun Watson and what he will look like. I think he'll be better, but again, will he be good enough to justify that contract? That's where I have real questions.
Connor, I know you have another point. I'm just going to throw another question at you. You can put it in with your point. Is he more geared to be an indoor quarterback because he was so successful in playing in domes and in Houston, and the nature of Cleveland, the majority of the games are in difficult conditions. Can he step up and play in those conditions and make sure they win games?
I think that's an arguable point. And look, we've seen the house cat accusation or allegation leveled at other quarterbacks as well. Jared Goff probably being one of the more notable people on the receiving end of that criticism, and justifiably so until he shakes it off. But just to the point that actually Colin was finishing on there, which I wanted to just come in on, which is the guaranteed money and what that says. That says you're the best quarterback in the league. And, you got to go and justify that. That literally says you are the best. Contractually, financially, you're the best quarterback in the NFL right now. You got to go and prove that. And proving that, to Colin's point, means at least a Super Bowl appearance.
So he's the third best quarterback in the division with Kenny Pickett.
I would say, yeah, I mean, what you're looking at probably is right now. But again, like we sat this time last year and all of the column inches were dedicated to the AFC West being the best quarterback division that the NFL had ever seen. So, it's up to Deshaun Watson to go and prove all the doubters wrong. And as Connor rightly points out, he has the money. The Browns have done what they can to try to support him, given the ammunition that they had at their disposal following the trade. The excuses are gone. It's time to go out and deliver.
Yeah, we had some interesting feedback to our TikTok, Instagram, and social piece that went up on the Steelers, in which, Connor, you were the man on the hot seat in that particular piece, and some people question whether the Steelers have a better roster than the Browns. I would argue that the Browns still have a better roster than the Steelers, and I'd be very interested to see what happens with the Browns team. I'm going to move on to another quarterback, and I've thrown this one in. It's probably a bit of a strange one, but Derek Carr. And the reason I have Derek Carr in, well, Colin knows how much I have love for Derek Carr. I always felt he was better, and he was put in a very difficult position with the Raiders. And in fairness to Colin, he rightly called it out on our AFC West piece around the fact that Derek Carr has been kind of dragging that Raiders organization through the mud for a period of time, and they kind of threw it all on him at the end. I mean, does he have a point to prove? I'll start with you, Colin. Does he have a point to prove going here to New Orleans in a division that's very winnable? Is the expectation is the Saints are the favourites right now. You've got a rookie quarterback in Carolina. Essentially, you could say you've got a rookie quarterback in Atlanta. You've got the Bucs in a bit of a no man's land. Everybody would expect the Saints to win the division. What for Derek Carr is a point-proving season, and how much do the Saints have to go deep into the playoffs for him to be looked at as a really successful signing for the Saints?
Well, I think if they make the playoffs and if he was to win a playoff game, right, that would get an enormous monkey off his back, which is what Derek Carr has always had to kind of contend with. And the year where he was fantastic, obviously, and so he ended up breaking his leg. So he has been unfortunate. I've said it, and I know you're a big fan of his, not as big a fan as Stephen O'Rourke and others. And I pointed out, I think he's a very good leader, but I think you win with Derek Carr, but maybe not because of Derek Carr. But I think he will be in an infinitely better situation than he was with the Raiders. I think the Saints are a much more stable franchise. And I think that ultimately he was sacrificed because they had to do something. And we know that they couldn't afford to pay off Josh McDaniels. So they moved off of Derek Carr. And I think for the Saints, it is an upgrade. As much as I, don't think you pay big money to quarterbacks that don't, give you the opportunity to win the Super Bowl. For the Saints, it probably makes a lot of sense because we don't know what you have in Carolina, don't really know what you have in Atlanta, and we've already discussed the Bucs. So to me, if they were to make the playoffs and win a playoff game, I would count that as an enormously successful season.
Connor, was I right to put him on the list as a potential redemption story, or are we reading too much into it?
No, I think he'll probably see it that way, and I think the manner of his exit and the way they sat him for the last couple of games, I don't think he deserved that. Whatever about the legal or contractual motivating factors that led the organization to do that, to Colin's point, the stoicism that he showed and the stability that he brought to that franchise, given the turmoil that they've been through off the field, I I don't think I don't think he deserved the way that ended, and I think he's got something huge to prove. We know what a big motivating factor that can be when somebody feels slighted in the NFL. I mean, narratively, it's something that, if you talk about maybe people wishing against Deshaun Watson succeeding in Cleveland, I think a lot of people will be wishing for Derek Carr to succeed in New Orleans, and that could be one of the feel good arcs of the season. It's one that you like to think writes itself. Again, though, talking about Derek's off-field misfortune, or how events off the field or even on the field in terms of his injury have maybe held him back in the past. In the last 24 hours, obviously, we've seen Alvin Kamara's off-field issues that at least legally resolve themselves, but it remains to be seen what the NFL is going to do by way of a potential suspension there. So that'll have some bearing on at least how Derek Carr starts his tenure in New Orleans, and may impact how quickly he gets to come out of the gate there. But given the division that's around him, I'd take his position over Deshaun Watson's, actually, funnily enough, if I had to choose from between the two of them.
Colin, do you think there's a scenario in any way where he still has the Raiders in his head, or do you think he's completely fresh at that now and he'll be fully focused? Because he has done a number of press conferences, and even lingering questions are still coming at him about the Raiders and how it ended. I think this stage people will be moving on to the Saints scenario as opposed to thinking back. Because we have seen in games where he tends to overdo it and try to do the hard, difficult thing. You see the road game against the Rams where essentially gave that game away. Like, he has thrown silly interceptions. Is there any case, am I showing something out there that's just not really realistic?
No, because he's human, and human emotion will always factor into it. It all depends on how you can channel that. And if you go back through, we come from a country where our mythology, how many Irish folklore tales are about revenge or revenge fantasies, or where revenge goes wrong. So it'll all depend on whether he is able to channel it. And if he can, the fact that there is a decent, if aging, and in some ways it will be interesting to see how the NFL respond to the Alvin Kamara news, and what that suspension might mean, what that could potentially mean for the Saints in terms of cutting him, depending on how long he's out for, what that would mean for a contract. Does his behavior mean that you can move off of him without the penalty? There's all sorts of things to consider here. But look, I think Derek Carr is a very experienced operator. I think he also probably benefited from seeing how his brother was kind of chewed up by the league as well. And so I think, it's not going to be, I suppose, the memories or the bitterness of how it ended with the Raiders won't be what derails ultimately Derek Carr and the Saints, whenever, unless they win the Super Bowl, which I think is extremely unlikely.
Connor, we'll stick to Kamara for one more. I'll show you a hot take. Jamal Williams will take over as the lead running back, having signed from the Lions with his 18 touchdowns last season. Zeke Elliott is still available. Is he somewhere that could land? Is that a team that would suit him as a secondary running back if Kamara gets a potential ban?
When Jerry Jones moves on from somebody, do you really want to be picking that guy up or think that he's the future of your franchise? I don't know, Jim. That's Tony Romo might say.
We might end up snipping this a bit if it happens. Colin, you're next, and I'm going to just put this one straight over to you. Russell Wilson, redemption story. Bearing in mind the expectations leading into last season, you touched on it there. Everybody felt the AFC West was the best division of football last year. It didn't kind of transpire that way. Difficult season for the Broncos and the Raiders. But Sean Payton has gone in there. We saw very early on, and we spoke about it on our AFC West discussion around how he immediately laid down the law in terms of how he's going to manage things and not have particular people in the building. From what you're reading, and obviously you're part of a Broncos podcast separately, is Russell Wilson kind of buying into the Sean Payton experience to date? And what do you think ultimately is a season of redemption for Russell Wilson, for us to be sitting here this time next year with no talk of them moving on from him?
Well, is he buying into it? For the most part, I think so. Sean Payton had called for players to work in silence. I think Sean Payton was aware of all of the noise that kind of existed around the Broncos and all of the hype that has existed for the past few years. And for the most part, other than that one video he put out, Russ has kept a much lower profile this year than he did last year. I have real concerns. Because last year was awful, but it wasn't unprecedented. Russ had been sliding, and I suppose it depends on whether you go with the way in which the NFL rates QBs or you go with QBR. So you can say 2018 or 2019 were Russ's best years. Some people will say Russ has been on the slide for 4 years. Some people would tell you it's 3 years. But either way, it's a significant slide over the course of a number of years, and it's very difficult to I suppose rejuvenate from that sort of slide. The thing that I thought was interesting was Bradley Chubb, who was with the Broncos, first round pick, very highly regarded at one point, moved over to the Dolphins last year, and he gave an interview earlier this week, and it was both enlightening and somewhat terrifying, right? Because he said, and again, this is a guy who's moved on, he's no skin in the game anymore. Russ did everything possible to win last year and everything possible to get the team ready to win. Now, either Nathaniel Hackett's coaching regime was even worse than we could possibly have imagined and we have heard to this point, in which case you need to ask questions, as to how and why he was allowed to continue for the number of weeks that he was. Or Russ is putting it all in and he's still coming up short. I mean, the worst thing in the world, is so when somebody comes to you, they've made a real mess of something, they say, I was doing my best. And you kind of go, well, if that's your best, time to exit stage left. So again, this is where there are real question marks, but they have done, I suppose, they brought in Sean Payton, right? So the coaching piece is a completely different from last year. They've brought in a very experienced coordinator. They have invested in the O-line. They look like they're going to, go back to the way in which Russ was successful in Seattle, which he obviously didn't like. I don't think we're going to see Russ cooking at all in any way, shape, or form. I think it's going to be very different. And while it's probably not going to be the quick slant game that ultimately was so successful for Drew Brees and Sean Payton and Michael Thomas, I don't think you're going to see Jerry Jeudy as Michael Thomas. I think you will see aspects of the deep ball. For us, the Broncos have to go back to the playoffs, for Russ to, there not to be any talk about next year. And that's a big ask in the AFC and in the AFC West in particular. And the problem for us is, that he is in a division where you do have Justin Herbert and you do have Patrick Mahomes. And he's constantly going to be compared to those two guys. So is redemption possible? Absolutely, but it is going to be quite the rocky road to get there.
Connor, if the Broncos make the playoffs, what in your opinion is more likely to be the storyline? Sean Payton turns his Broncos team around, or Russell Wilson returns to the form which we saw early in his career in Seattle?
I think,
or a combination of both. A combination of both, even.
I think more likely leaning towards the former than the latter, because I just think, we've again talked about this before, how Russell makes for a spectacularly convenient scapegoat because he's a little bit quirky and, because of the things he's done in public, and even because of that insane Subway commercial where he looks like a serial killer, and there's been some great memes on that one which people should check out in their spare time. It's endlessly entertaining. But and Colm's touched on some of the points there. It's still very difficult for me to parse the extent to which things went wrong last season because Russell's physical gifts have declined to a point where he can no longer do the things that the Broncos you would think acquired him to do, or that they just really did not help him in any way, shape, or form by the game that they were expecting him to play and by the coach that they put in place to oversee that, whose game really, when the cold light of day, when you take a step back from it, wasn't compatible with what made Russell great in the first place at all. So, there was a change required of Nathaniel Hackett that he clearly wasn't capable of making. There's a change required of Russell Wilson, which I don't think, to be fair, last season he was given the opportunity to make. And, the noises coming out of Seattle when he left were he's nowhere near as mobile as he used to be. He doesn't have the escapability. He can't thrive in the broken play scenario the way that he used to be able to. You're not going to see him either climb the pocket and show that steely-eyed determination and fire that deep ball when it becomes available, or escape a collapsing pocket, make something out of nothing and heave the ball 60 yards down the field and drop it on a dime, as he's done time and time again at the best moments in his career. He doesn't have that anymore. But they didn't help him at all. And they didn't set that offense up in a way that would help Russell succeed. So between Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, they have to meet in the middle here. I think Payton is much more flexible and obviously a vastly more experienced coach than Hackett, and will know how to get the best out of what he has available to him. And I wouldn't bet against Russell doing something intriguing next season. I don't think anybody who ascends to the heights that he's achieved in his NFL career, he's made 2 Super Bowls, he's won 1. Even as recently as 2020, the rust pot was overflowing. He really was cooking. I don't think you get to that position without having the work ethic. Of course you don't, without having the work ethic and without having the resilience to push through a tight spot. The question is, does he have the mental agility and flexibility to adjust to doing something slightly new? And can they move their game enough from where it was last season offensively to accommodate that? Like, that's obviously going to mean, an awful lot less playing under center. Like, why are you playing a short quarterback like that under center? He needs to be a shotgun dominated offense. And I think we'll see Payton try to implement that, which it is a fairly big transition from where they were, but it's something that they're going to have to do to get the most out of them.
I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that we all pick the Chiefs to win the AFC West come prediction time. I'd be interested to see if either of you have the Broncos as your potential wildcard team within the AFC. 2 players that had really strong seasons last year with little expectation, I would say, going into it, and that was Geno Smith and Daniel Jones, both of which have been paid this offseason, varying contracts, but again, I suppose substantially in the grand scheme of things in terms of quarterback and I suppose the longevity of the contracts as well. I'll start with you, Connor. A lot of people feel Seattle are on the right track again, and they potentially could be challenging the 49ers for this division this year. There's a few people even going lavish on them to win the division over the 49ers. Is Geno Smith one of the reasons why they would do that, or do you think it's predominantly on this defense, which seems to be kind of going back to the Legion of Boom type days? Or we saw some games towards the end of the season, I think of the Panthers home game where Geno had a really bad game and looked like Geno of old, but there was more bright spots than bad. Do you see another productive season for him, or will he regress slightly?
Well, I mean, the stat line tells you everything you needed to know. Like the Geno redemption, such as it was last season, was very much real. Will he regress this year? I think they've got Jackson Smith and Jigba in the draft. That receiver room is arguably the best in the NFL right now. And they seem to be in pretty much most people's top 3, if not the top, according to most of the experts' picks during the offseason. I think that's really exciting. So he's got more around him even than he did last season, and he wasn't exactly short of weapons last season, even as it was. I think the thing with Geno, which is going to be really interesting to watch, is there wasn't an awful lot of tape on prime Geno because we didn't see peak or prime Geno until last season. When people have time to figure you out and people have a little bit more material to work with, defensive coordinators are cute enough to adjust around you. So I don't think Geno is going to have it as easy, quote unquote. Yeah, and to be fair, at the same time, there wasn't a huge amount of expectation heading into the season. We were all looking to see what Russell would do in Denver. We weren't looking to see what the leftovers would do back in Seattle. So they were heading into the season with very different expectations, and that can help a team. At the same time that they were rolling, and they're chippy. Pete Carroll is chippy. They're hyper competitive. they'll want to break people up on defense, as you say. They're trying to rekindle that Legion of Boom spirit, and they've got some pieces. I know we're going to talk about some of the additions that they've made and whether that they'll pan out in the way that they hope that they will. But they're set fair for the season ahead. I don't think we're going to see Gino take an even bigger step forward. I think we've seen his ceiling. The question is, can he maintain, or is he going to fall off? And I think some of that is going to be down to what comes at him from the league's defensive coordinators, who now have had a much better opportunity to evaluate what he does and solve for it.
Colin, Lewis Riddick, one of the leading analysts for ESPN, probably one of the few that's still there after the last 2 weeks, but he has suggested that Seahawks win this division, and he wouldn't be surprised if Seattle find their way back to the Super Bowl and be the NFC team, going up against whoever the NFC team, which is the Bengals, Chiefs, or whoever comes out of that side of the draw. If that was the case, would it have to be Gino leading them in certain games to get the wins? Because, like, once we talk about how good they've been in the draft, and defensively over the past 2 years, they've drafted some really good players, you still find you need your quarterback in certain games in the fourth quarter to step up and win their games. Is he capable of going on that run and putting them in a position to be really challenging this year?
That's where it's going to be interesting, because if you look at it, right, Gino has a kind of a somewhat surprising start to the season. Obviously, they beat the Broncos in a kind of a bizarre game where the Broncos dropped the ball twice in the 1 yard line, and all the emotion that was around that. And then he kind of is up and down for the next couple of weeks. And then between weeks 4 and weeks 12, Gino was like the hottest QB in the league outside of Mahomes and Burrow, essentially, and Trevor Lawrence in the back end of it. But in the after that, like week 13 through 17, up and down. And that's where kind of the piece around, what Connor mentions around those defensive coordinators. Now, he had a good game against the Jets. He had an okay game in the playoffs against the 49ers. But when you are, I suppose, relying on those fourth quarter comebacks, or ultimately driving on the field to make it happen, that is where legends are born, and that's where ultimately it comes down to, and that's where we have to see him take the next step. Right. So last year he made the comeback step. He wins, understandably, rightly, comeback player of the year, but he needs to take the next step now. And Connor's pointed out the pieces that they have put around him. So they should have, a really balanced and offense. They've really experienced coaches there. I liked a lot of the additions on defense. And I think there can be expectation there that they would make a jump on last year. I mean, should they compete for the division? Absolutely. You would still, right now, I would have the 49ers as favorites. But again, we don't know what their QB situation looks like. So is Gino capable of it? Yes. But that comes with its own asterisks.
We'll move on to the next quarterback, who I believe has a lot of similarities to this storyline. I think we have a split on this one because I have a funny feeling this one may not go as planned. I'm going to start with this one, obviously, as a Giants fan. Daniel Jones. I'd argue Daniel Jones had more to prove last year than he does this year, despite the contract, because Giants didn't pick up the fifth-year option last year. Brand new coaching staff, could have easily walked away after 1 year. It's very rare you see a GM and a head coach come in and reward that quarterback with a new contract. It usually tends to go the other way. They put a lot of pieces around this year. Paris Campbell, Waller, Jalen Hyatt, and imagine Barkley will get signed at some stage in terms of long term. All the pieces are in place now for the Giants to come back and be a really productive team offensively. Offensive coordinator hasn't moved on despite numerous head coaching interviews. I mean, I think it's there for this guy, but I see it in the same kind of mold as Geno Smith. I think he'll have a good season. I think I could even see the Giants making the playoffs, but whether he's that type of quarterback and then lead them beyond the divisional round into the championship game to Super Bowl, for me, might be a bit of a jump, but certainly understand the merits of what he gave him the contract. I do think he'll have a strong season, but again, I probably have my biased hat on. I'll start with you, Connor. Would you coincide and agree with where I'm going with this?
Well, look, I mean, my mantra on these things: coaching matters. He's only had one good year of coaching in his career, and he stepped up and found a new level in his game. I also liked, we discussed his playoff performance last year. He stepped up and had the biggest game of his career in the biggest game of his career. I love when you see that happen. That tells you something about what Daniel Jones is made of. They've put more support around him. I think what they're building there, the culture looks good. As I said, I think the coaching looks really good. Look, I don't think he's among the top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL. I think we're fooling ourselves to even suggest that's the case or that that's even achievable for him. But I don't think he's gonna take a step back. I think there is upside for him still. I don't think what you're suggesting is in any way crazy. Again, it's all relative to what you've got around you and the road in front of you, division-wise, to get to the playoffs. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Giants playing meaningful football in December, January next year.
Colin, I think you've always had a bone of contention with the contract as opposed to the player himself, but I'll let you chime in now. You're concerned about this contract, yeah?
Huge concerns around the contract. They're paying him to be a top 8 QB in the league, and he's not. Last year he outperformed what we expected, but he didn't set the world alight. To me, again, it was coaching, and I just think too often we have seen players kind of have great seasons, right? Connor will remember Sexy Rexy, and that one good year that he had for the Bears. There's plenty of others you can point to. I think Daniel Jones is fine. And if you were paying Daniel Jones 25 million, 30 million a year, you'd be fine about it. I just find it very difficult to believe that he elevates you. He certainly he has learned and he's improved and he's reduced the fumbles. Since obviously that first year. I just think ultimately you've a ceiling with it, and you're paying 40 million for a ceiling. I think the Giants are a storied franchise. I would have no, animosity towards them. The Giants were to go to win a Super Bowl, that'd be great. I just think you put a limit on yourself with Daniel Jones. I still don't understand it. I would have just tagged him, and I'd have been prepared to move on from Saquon. So if Daniel Jones takes another step forward, I would be surprised. And I hope because you're a fan of the Giants, I hope he does surprise me. But I think what we saw last year is as much as you're ever going to get from Daniel Jones.
I look forward to the conversations during the season. They're always entertaining on the back of a good and bad performance. Connor, you have a point on the contract?
Yeah, just on in the terms the columns outlined, that absolutely he looks expensive, but it's a top 8 contract until the next 8 contracts come up for renewal, and then it becomes a top 16 contract because that's just the nature of the NFL. It really comes down to replacement value, and I guess in those terms, Colin, you're like, well, who are you going to get for that money that would have improved you above where Daniel Jones is? I'm not so sure they could have done it this season, and you're taking a punt then as regards what will be available next season. So he's definitely Mr. Right now, and we'll see whether he turns out to be Mr. Right. But I don't think the contract is quite as saucy as it looks at first instance. But I may well be proven to be a fool when the crop of quarterbacks who are available next season show their mettle.
Colin, I have a quick question for you. Go on, sorry, I'll let you do your point, and I'll let you the question.
Because remember when we had our kind of Steelers discussion, and Connor has pointed to it earlier in the episode where he talked about Magic Mike Tomlin, and we're not there yet in terms of, well, we can put Dable there because Mike Tomlin's on the Mount Rushmore, but I'm a big believer in Dable, and you saw what he did with Josh Allen. I think he could have put almost anyone in there, and David would have made magic happen at the QB position. We talked about that year that kind of Tomlin had, duck in, and they still didn't have a losing season. I just think Dable could have done that. You could have kind of parachuted anybody in, and it would have been fine.
That was my question, Colin. Is it the Brian Dable factor as opposed to the Daniel Jones storyline? Interesting times ahead for all the players in which we discussed in this segment of the Irish NFL show. Next time on the Irish NFL show, we will recap defensive players leading into the new season. But for now, Colin, Connor, thanks for your time. Right, I didn't send the new link. I can slice it out. Right, defensive players. I threw in a whole lot of defensive players. I don't know whether they're the right ones. So if anybody wants to, challenge me on them, feel free to do so. Where am I going for? A lot of Seattle in here tonight.
Draymond Jones, Jordan Davis, Javon Hargrave, Von Miller, Jalen Ramsey.
I think who you have there is fine, and then I think if we go with one surprise at the end, then that's a good one as well, just in terms of the who we think just a player that will surprise.
How are we on time? What's our time constraints? Are we on a hard stop at 10? Are we?
No, I have Connor Philpott at 10:30.
Connor?
No, I'm the same. Yeah, I'm good till 10:30.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking because I had put in for a rookie segment on the 4 quarterbacks. I didn't even get to that. Unless you want to do them now. You want to do the rookies now?
Do you want to do that now and run through that, and then potentially do another link for the defensive players?
Yeah, grand. Okay. We'll go.